Greetings, dear listener. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new scary stories and support me with a like. Enjoy listening.
Dan was walking along the road. He didn't really need to go anywhere. He just walked, walking near the cottages and looking at them. The sun was shining from the sky, but it was not hot because it was spring. Besides, it was already evening. On one side of the road there was a dense forest, on the other, the very cottages that Dan was looking at. Just like that, with nothing to do. On the way, Dan remembered what good things happened that day. In general, when the sun was shining, Dan usually wanted to think about good things. Firstly, in history, for his report on the Japanese commander Oda Nobunaga, he finally received, if not excellent, but good. Secondly, he went to the hospital to see his little brother, and there he was told that the button swallowed by the baby had been successfully removed and his life was out of danger. Thirdly, at the races at the hippodrome, the horse he bet on came, if not first, but at least second, which is also not bad. Fourth, his father praised him for cleaning the garage well and helping him wash the car. For all these thoughts, Dan did not notice how he left the city and was now walking along the highway. He didn't know how long Dan walked. He had no desire to look at the time. Suddenly, on the right side, he saw a standing gas station. There was no one there, and in general it looked kind of abandoned. Bricks, pieces of plywood, shards of glass lay underfoot. Gas pumps were broken, and some were even turned out of the foundation so that only the hoses were sticking out. Dan loved to walk in abandoned places, although his parents forbade him to do so, citing the fact that he could get into trouble there. And so he decided to explore the gas station from the inside. There was nothing special about the broken speakers. They could have been broken by vandals. As before, when exploring such places, Dan got the feeling that he was not alone, and he became wary. But to the question, "Who is here?" there was no answer. Dan went inside. Nothing special either. The same bricks, glass, pieces of plywood as outside. Not far from the entrance there was a dark square hole in the floor. Either the floor or water could be seen below. Dan decided to check it out and, picking up a piece of brick, threw it into the hole. The darkness below immediately responded with a quiet splash, which meant that there was still water down there. Walking around the hole, Dan approached the table standing near the window. There were some documents on the table. Dan dusted them off to read them, but there was nothing special about them. It turned out to be just a notebook in which those who once worked here wrote down what car arrived, how many liters of gasoline they bought, and how much they paid for it. Suddenly, a voice came from behind. "He's close. Run." Dan looked back, but there was no one behind. "Who is there?" Dan asked. The voice repeated, "Run." Judging by the voice, it was a teenager. "What's happening? Who are you?" Dan asked, trying to remain calm. A boy of about 13, only about a year older than Dan, entered the room. At first glance, there was nothing special about him. Leather jacket, blue t-shirt visible from underneath, jeans, sneakers, dark glasses, black disheveled hair. But his face seemed somehow frozen. For some time, Dan and the unfamiliar boy looked at each other. Then the boy said, "You shouldn't have come here. He is here. He did not spare any of those who worked here in the 30s. I, like you, was here, walked, looked. And he did not spare me either. Run while you still can." "Who is he?" Dan asked, confused. He didn't know whether to believe this strange boy. The boy sighed. "I don't know, but I know he's been here a long time," he replied. Suddenly water splashed under the floor as if something large, alive and predatory was moving there. "It's him. He sensed you and is crawling out," the boy whispered, frozen in one place. A terrible creature resembling a man crawled out of a hole in the floor, but his body was swollen from being underwater for a long time, and in general he turned out to be dead. His eyes were bulging. His flesh was falling off in chunks, spreading a suffocating smell of rot. Water flowed from it in streams, and in its mouth there were many sharp, needle-like teeth. "So you got caught too, and you'll stay here," the creature croaked. Dan screamed, and then a strange boy pushed him towards the back door, shouting, "Run! I can't be helped. He killed me, and you can still save yourself. I'll hold him back a little." Running out the back door, Dan ran away from this damn place. In the gas station left behind, there was the sound of a struggle, a terrible roar, croaking, and screams of that same boy. But soon all this died down in the distance. When Dan got to the cottages from which he walked to that creepy gas station, it had already begun to get dark, but it was not completely dark yet. Only the sun was showing its last rays over the horizon. Near the bright red 3-story cottage, Dan sat down to rest. In the courtyard of the cottage, someone was fidgeting, talking. A dog on a chain was barking, but Dan was too depressed and scared to listen to this evening noise, familiar to the owners of this cottage. And so Dan sat motionless. Suddenly, a hand fell on his shoulder, smooth, well-groomed. Her fingers are hung with rings set with large stones. Dan flinched and with a cry tried to throw this hand off his shoulder, but then he was suddenly grabbed by the shoulders and shaken violently. "Look at me. Look, are you okay at all?" The man who was shaking him by the shoulders said quickly. Dan looked at this man and realized that the hand that first fell on his shoulder belonged to this man. The man had dark glasses over his eyes. His hair was combed and secured with hairspray. He turned out to be dressed in an expensive 2-piece suit. "Let's go into the house," he said. Dan obediently followed him. At the house, the first thing the man did was give him some water to drink, and then, having found out his name and phone number, he called his parents. Dan decided to ask this man about that scary gas station. The man told him that once this gas station worked, but no one knows what happened there. All that is known is that one day everyone who was there at this gas station disappeared, and since then this woman has appeared there terrible whole. When asked if any boy had disappeared there, the man replied that his 13-year-old son had disappeared there 5 years ago. "I went there and never returned." When Dan talked about the boy he met there, the man frowned. "This is what my son looked like," he said. Dan kept silent about the terrible monster. I didn't want to talk about it, but the man wouldn't have believed him. Soon Dan's parents arrived and took him away. They didn't even scold him, since the main thing was that he was still alive. But for another 3 or 4 months, Dan's parents had to take Dan to psychologists so that he could at least a little forget the nightmare that happened at that gas station. And a year later, that gas station was demolished. All the water was pumped out from there, and that monster had to migrate to other places, since it could only live in water. In the basement, after pumping out the water, they found 4 tortured bodies, 3 adult workers of that gas station and that same boy, the son of that man. The bodies were buried, and soon that story was forgotten. Not even a hole remained. It was concreted over after all 4 bodies were removed from there. My friend and I were returning home from a long trip out of town. Halfway to our city, Sergey, my friend, who was driving the car, began to run out of gas, as well as our patience, since the traffic jam that had been overcome in the evening was not conducive to raising our mental tone. Tired from the road, we parked near a gas station. I stayed in the car and Sergey went to pay for fuel. The wristwatch showed 2 hours 50 minutes. A couple of minutes later, my friend returned and invited me to come with him. He was clearly alarmed about something and a little confused. Getting out of the car, I followed him to the gas station building. A young girl who introduced herself as Olga was waiting for us on the threshold. Pale as a sheet, she trembled and cast frightened glances at us, but at the same time it was noticeable that the girl was glad to see us. After our inquiries about the reason for her such mysterious behavior, she told us what had recently happened to her. further in her words. At 12 o'clock at night, as usual, I walked around the territory, checked the panic button, closed the report for the day, and went to pour myself some tea. Since we don't have a security guard and we work one at a time, replacing each other, we have to do everything herself. After drinking tea, she decided to lie down for at least a couple of hours. Fortunately, there had been no clients since 10:30. Entering the closet, she collapsed on the ottoman but was so tired from the day that she could not immediately fall asleep. There was a strange feeling of someone's presence in the room, as if someone or something was watching me. Having driven away unpleasant thoughts from myself and deciding that the reason for my fears was trivial, overwork, I closed my eyes. But as soon as I did this, there was something loud inside the pavilion rang. Frightened that the cooler had broken once again, I got up and went out into the pavilion. There was a stack of keys lying on the floor near the cash register. I clearly remember how I left them on the table near the magazine. Picking up the keys and putting them in my pocket, I just wanted to go back to bed when I heard a whisper behind me. I admit, my heart sank. I couldn't make out the words, but I can say that the whisper consisted of several voices simultaneously merging into an eerie cacophony. Someone tall was standing in the doorway, and it seemed to me that the person standing was dressed in a robe that reached to the floor, with a hood on his head. The sounds around me became louder, and I almost fainted from horror. Suddenly there was a roar. I turned around sharply and saw your friend persistently drumming on the window. It's good that I had the keys with me. I rushed to the door and was able to jump out into the street. After listening to the story of the girl who was scared out of her wits, I made the most correct decision, as it seems to me, and sent Seryoga to my home for holy water. Calling his wife, he gave her the task of pouring the remaining holy water after Easter into a bottle and giving it to Seryoga. It was already close to my house, and my friend quickly returned. All the time he was gone, the girl, who categorically did not want to enter the pavilion, stood on the street. I, on the contrary, went into the room, but not finding anyone there, I went out and we nervously smoked together in a specially designated place and began to peer into the darkness of the night road. After our friend's return, we took a number of inquisitorial measures, sprinkling the entire pavilion and the surrounding area with holy water. We prudently poured the remaining holy water into the cooler. Then Olga called her young man by phone, who arrived at our place 20 minutes later. We, inspired by a peculiar adventure, went home, having previously agreed with our new friend to visit her in a couple of days when she returns to work again. Seryoga and I kept our promise and stopped by Olga. She was very happy to see us and said that the recent night incident had taken a new turn. It turned out that Olga did not have the best relationship with her replacement, a rather malicious person who did not disdain baiting and other dirty insinuations. Having replaced Olga after that night, the first thing she did was find fault with the report and create a scandal, which was witnessed by numerous visitors to the gas station. When their conflict moved into the endgame phase, she said to Ol, "What were you doing here at night, bitch? The stench is incredible. Even the water is rotten." Olga ignored her fiery speech and, when leaving, recommended that she see a psychiatrist. This happened during my service in the far north. I once went on a business trip to a neighboring district to the city of N. I went in my car, barely persuaded the commander, but I didn't want to jump on the train, and I wanted to turn around quickly. New Year was just around the corner. I worked, got ready to head back, and then, as luck would have it, the frost hit harder. By local standards, it's not exactly cold. Well, 30, 35 below zero. Well, I think about 1,000 kilometers. Not very far, I have a good car, and I really want to go home. I poured coffee into a thermos and grabbed sandwiches. There will be few objects of civilization in the form of cafes along the way. After all, it's the North. The road flowed like a smooth gray canvas among the vast, white desert. Drifting snow swept along the side of the road, and the dim northern sun still lifted my spirits. We were already 200 kilometers behind, and suddenly the light blinked. We were running out of gas. I couldn't believe my eyes. On leaving the city, I filled up the tank full. Fortunately, after a few kilometers, I saw a sign, "Gas station in 1,000 meters." I thought again. On the way here, I didn't even notice this gas station. The gas station appeared out of the frosty fog. The illumination was shining blue. The sign of a small store coquettishly winked with the image of a cup of coffee. There were no customers at the gas station except my car. It's not surprising. Normal people sit at home in such cold weather, I thought. And putting the refueling nozzle into the tank, I went to pay for the fuel. The cashier girl struck me with her paleness and breathtaking manicure. Her nails were painted with bright red varnish of unimaginable length. I usually don't pay attention to this, but what caught my eye was that the polish had a strange effect. My nails seemed as if they were wet. For some reason, this made an unpleasant impression on me, and I put the card for paying for fuel on the table. I did not hand it over to the cashier. In order not to stare at the cashier's hands, I began to examine the assortment of the small store. Having accepted the payment, the girl handed me my card and a piece of paper. "I ask you to fill out the form. Today, we have few clients, so when you fill out the form, I will give you a discount." What a discount! Payment has already been accepted, I thought, and began to refuse, citing the fact that I was in a hurry to get home before dark. For some reason, it was unpleasant for me to be in this room. I wanted to get out into the frosty air as soon as possible. The girl began to speak more insistently and tried to push a piece of paper and a pen into my hands. At that moment, for some reason, a shiver ran through me to the very top of my head. I left the offer unanswered and literally jumped out of the store. My hands were shaking and everything was shrinking inside. I couldn't understand what was happening to me. After spilling drops of gasoline from the pistol on myself, I slammed the tank lid, stumbled, climbed into the car, and for some reason blocked the door. Having calmed down a little, I started the engine and drove out onto the highway. In the rearview mirror, I saw the blue lights of a gas station and a cashier girl who was standing at the exit of the gas station and looking after me. She was without outerwear and a light jacket. Her long black hair was tossed by the evil north wind. Horror squeezed my heart. I pressed the gas and grabbed the steering wheel. I no longer dared to look back. I'm an adult, I thought. Well, I'm really scared of a girl with nails. My nerves need to be treated. So, arguing with myself, I pulled myself together and gradually my heart stopped beating like crazy. And then, what the hell? The light bulb blinked. The same. It can't be, I thought. Turning to the side of the road, I got out of the car, knelt down, and carefully examined the body from all sides. There were no visible leaks anywhere. Everything was fine. I opened the hood and made sure that everything was in order there too. Where's the gasoline? I drove no more than 5 kilometers. After refueling, I got into the car, perplexed by such oddities. Gasoline is running out. The gas station is 5 kilometers behind. And then I realized that I couldn't go back there. I just couldn't, that's all. I'll go ahead, I decided, since soon there should be a small village along the way and I'll sort it out there. The winter day is short. The sun was already hanging like a dim spot above the horizon when I saw her. She stood at the exit of a gas station. Blue illumination lights illuminated her, a girl with black hair dressed in a light jacket. I was afraid to take my eyes off the road and look at her. My foot automatically pressed the gas pedal to the floor, and I slipped past those blue lights. What was it? The thought was beating in my head, and sweat flowed in sticky streams down my back. And then I began to pray, almost for the first time in my life. I did not pray. I prayed as best I could, in my own words, out loud and almost breaking into a scream. After 30 kilometers, a village appeared. I stopped on the side of the road, opened the thermos, and began to drink a hot drink. I was glad to see rare passers-by as if they were family. Knowing that there was a gas station at the exit of the village, I drove forward. The gas station attendant, a local boy, was wrapped in the high collar of an oily jacket. I got out of the car and asked him, "Have they opened a new gas station about 35 to 40 kilometers from the village towards Town Inn?" The boy stared at me in surprise and said what I already knew. "There is no gas station there. The nearest gas station is in that direction, in the city inn itself." Having filled the tank full, I reached home in the evening. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next year, in the summer, I had the opportunity to travel that road again. 2 colleagues and I were traveling to the city of N for work. Having passed the village, I looked out of the car windows with fear. But fortunately for me, there was only a northern summer landscape, no gas stations.
This terrible story happened to me in the summer. I work at a gas station 10 kilometers from the city. The work is not dusty. There is a lot of free time. You mostly sit and read books. There's no internet connection here. They take me to work and back. There are no problems with this at all. Salary is also a sin to complain about. The only thing is that it's very boring. Although every time I cry to my friends at work, it feels like they are ready to grab my hair. They work hard almost around the clock, but get paid 1.5 times less. This is how I live. I remember that day like it was yesterday. The stuffiness was terrible, although the sky was covered with a dense curtain of clouds. There were 2 of us at the gas station, me and Yegor, the security guard. I didn't understand Yegor's function at all. The guy, of course, is a good guy, but he only has to guard the corn in the garden, considering that he lived a nightlife and slept all the time at work. But what do I care? It's not so lonely when a big guy is 10 meters away from you, even if he's sleeping. So it was that day. I was reading a magazine, and Yegor was snoring peacefully at the entrance with the most menacing look that a sleeping guard, who was not even given a weapon, could have. At the gas station itself, we have a small shop with a general cash register. Basically nothing serious. Chips, chocolates, water. That's where we lived. I involuntarily flinched when the bell on the door rang loudly. A woman in her early 30s stood on the threshold. Such people rarely come to us. They are high-flying birds. A short dress, the size of several of my salaries, good makeup, tattoos, expensive stockings — I have a keen eye for this — and a handbag called the dream of my whole life. Apparently, he is trying to keep himself straight, although he is noticeably very worried. I also wondered to myself why she should twitch. It seems like I need to be nervous here. This is FIFA in our area. "Hello," I say. "Hello, I'm 9220 liters." She tried to smile, but either fear or embarrassment flashed in her eyes. I punched the check, took the money, and was still surprised. Such a woman clearly lives an expensive life, and such a car is a 3-door Niva. I expected at least a Toyota or Mazda. The whole time she was counting out the change, the woman was really nervous. She turned several times to the sleeping Yegor and constantly smiled tightly, as if apologizing. When I finally gave her the money, she rushed out of the building with relief and stuck the gun in the tank. Turning around every now and then, she refueled her old Niva, after which the worst happened. The stranger opened the passenger door, apparently to throw her bag inside. A woman's hand fell out limply from there, which the woman quickly picked up and put back. She turned around sharply, and then our eyes met. Not a trace remained of the former fear. Her eyes sparkled with furious anger, as if she were a crazy fury. While I was jumping out into the street, the woman managed to get behind the wheel and give the gas. I just managed to remember her number. Running back, I wrote it down on the journal page and began to wake John up. Thank God it didn't take a long time to explain to him what happened. About 5 minutes later, we were already talking to the police on the phone, talking about the make and number of the car. But this is where the strangest thing begins. The reference to the Ford was immediately transferred to the nearest post, but it did not appear there, although there was simply nowhere else to go. Not only is there not a single settlement in that direction, there is nowhere to turn, just one straight road. The police then looked at the cameras to see if a car was passing there. There was no need to even put anyone on the wanted list. The owner of the car filed a report of theft. But that's not all. This same owner's daughter, a 19-year-old girl, disappeared exactly on that day. I took the car keys as if I was going to pick up my mother and make ends meet. Our city is small, word of mouth is working at full capacity, and later, another interesting detail came to light. This girl was dating a married man whose wife disappeared on the same day. And under the photo identikit I compiled, the same woman from the gas station. This is all, of course, our speculation. It is clear that the police did not provide us with any information. But everyone knows one thing. Still neither the car, nor the mistress, nor the wife have been found, although quite a lot of time has passed, and I still shudder at every passing Ford.
In a quiet and peaceful village, where every year the inhabitants gathered together to celebrate Christmas, a terrible and inexplicable murder occurred. Jenny, a generous and beloved woman, has always been distinguished by her love of the holiday. Her house was decorated with bright garlands that pointed to midnight. The guests heard a piercing scream from the depths of Maria's house. They quickly ran inside to find out what had happened, and what they saw chilled their souls. Maria was lying lifeless on the floor, with visible signs of violence. Her eyes reflected anxiety and horror. Everyone was trying to figure out who and why killed this innocent woman on Christmas night. Christmas trees sparkled with colorful lights, creating an atmosphere of joy and happiness. All the villagers were looking forward. Suspicion fell on every guest, because each of them was present at the party. Traces of blood were found everywhere, but no other evidence. Everyone beroofd niet gelukkig de liefde. Zijn die magneels verrief zijn eindigen. Stel of verwacht dat de groep zeer was shocked and filled with fear. Who would do such a terrible thing on a night full of love and joy? However, as the investigation continued, deep and dark secrets emerged from Maria. It turned out that she was hiding the dark sides of her life. Many found that they had quarrels with her that led to deep resentment and anger. The Christmas tree sparkled with colorful lights, creating an atmosphere of joy and happiness. All the villagers were looking forward. Jansen zoekt voor een Emily Rose in de zes of de elf beners van de Hij rond de zin van de leven. Voor een manier de rust van stuk wel uit. Zoek is wel wat is best in de ziel. Zie hoe best voor een vrouw is zo zelf. En ik neem er zeer voorstellen. Voel me niet wacht van. Zie ook ze door heel veel slag waar ik graag als je niet was. En is best van zeer zelf met pas was ik pas was. Hij heeft waarschijnlijk goed. Hij heeft life ships. Horace was the exciting to see that it's not to her annual party. But this year, the party brought something terrible. When the hand of the clock. Now every year, when the village gathers together to remember Maria, there is always a mute feeling of fear and uncertainty among them. And their brightest and happiest time of the year is completely overshadowed by the mysterious and terrible story of the murder at Christmas.